The November wind tore through Chicago's Lincoln Park, rattling the skeletal branches along North Clark Street and carrying the faint tang of Lake Michigan. Michael Thompson, a 52-year-old accountant with graying temples and a wardrobe of pressed shirts, stood outside his apartment building, his fingers numb around a key that refused to turn. Apartment 3B had been his home for 15 years, a sanctuary of routine and memory. But now the lock held firm, unyielding to his efforts. He twisted the key again, harder, his knuckles whitening against the cold metal. "This can't be happening," he muttered, his breath clouding in the frigid air. The sun dipped below the skyline, casting the 5-story brick building in a cold gray shadow, its warm red facade dulled by the encroaching dusk. Michael's stomach knotted as he pressed the buzzer for 3B, his apartment, his refuge. No answer. He buzzed again, then a third time, his finger jabbing the button with mounting desperation. Silence greeted him, mocking his disbelief. Stepping back onto the cracked sidewalk, Michael squinted up at the third-floor window, shielding his eyes against the fading light. The beige curtains he and his late wife, Ellen, had chosen, a sentimental purchase from a cluttered shop in Evanston, were gone. In their place hung neon pink drapes, so garish they clashed violently with the building's understated elegance. "Lisa," he whispered, his sister's name a bitter curse. Lisa, 48, had been staying with him for 3 months, ever since her divorce from Greg, a slick car salesman who'd left her with nothing but a trail of bad debts. Michael had opened his door to her out of duty, despite his daughter Sarah's warnings over brunch at the Bongo Room, a cozy spot known for its towering pancakes. "Dad, she's trouble," Sarah had said. Her fork paused mid-bite. "She'll take everything if you let her. She always does." Michael had waved her off, sipping his black coffee, the steam curling around his face. "She's my sister, Sarah. She needs a hand. What kind of brother would I be if I said no?" Now, locked out of his own home, Michael felt the weight of his mistake like a stone in his chest. He pulled out his phone, its screen cracked from a fall during the chaos of tax season, and dialed Lisa's number. Straight to voicemail. "Lisa, it's me. What the hell's going on? Why doesn't my key work? Call me back, now." His voice was sharp, but a tremor betrayed the panic clawing at him. He called Sarah next. She answered on the second ring. "Dad, you sound stressed. What's wrong?" Her voice, usually warm and steady, carried an edge of concern. "I'm outside the apartment," Michael said, pacing the sidewalk, his loafers scuffing against the pavement, kicking up a stray leaf. "The lock's changed. Lisa's not answering. Something's not right." Sarah exhaled sharply, a sound heavy with frustration and vindication. "I knew it. She's been acting weird for weeks, Dad. Have you checked the lease? Is your name still on it?" Michael stopped pacing, his breath catching in his throat. "Of course it's on it. It's my place." But doubt slithered in. Cold and insidious, like the wind cutting through his wool coat. Flashback to 2 months ago. Michael sat at his kitchen table, the apartment warm with the glow of a single lamp and the faint scent of Ellen's lavender candles, which he still lit every evening in her memory. The soft blue walls, Ellen's choice, like the sky, she'd said, reflected the light, casting a serene hue over the room. Tax forms were spread across the table, a testament to the long hours of his busiest season. Lisa, her auburn hair pulled into a messy bun, lounged on the leather couch, sipping red wine from a glass she hadn't asked to use. "Mikey, you're a lifesaver," she said, her voice dripping with charm, her eyes scanning the room as if cataloging its contents. "I just need a little time to get back on my feet. I'm thinking of starting a business, maybe a boutique, something trendy for all those Lincoln Park moms with too much money." Michael nodded, his attention half on a spreadsheet, barely registering her words. He hadn't noticed her slipping into his office nook later that night, her fingers deftly rifling through his desk drawers. She'd found his lease agreement, utility bills, spare keys tucked in an old cigar box, even his social security card carelessly left in a folder. The next morning, she'd hugged him, her perfume cloying, her embrace a little too tight. "You're the best big brother," she said, her smile too wide, her eyes glinting with something Michael had missed. "Family helps family," he'd replied, patting her shoulder, distracted by an early client call. He hadn't seen the calculation behind her gratitude, the plan already taking shape. Now, standing outside his locked apartment, Michael's chest tightened with regret, a physical ache that rivaled the cold seeping through his coat. He pounded on the building's front door, the sound echoing down the quiet street, startling a pair of dog walkers across the way. Mrs. Callahan, a 70-year-old widow from 1A, poked her head out, her Chicago accent thick as she adjusted her glasses. "Michael, what's all the racket? You trying to wake the whole block?" Michael's face flushed, his breath visible in the chill. "I can't get in, Mrs. Callahan. My key doesn't work." She frowned, stepping onto the stoop in her faded housecoat, her slippers scuffing the concrete. "Lisa said you moved out, said she's taken over the lease. Showed me some papers all official-like, with your signature." Michael's heart lurched, a sickening drop. "Papers? What papers?" His voice rose, cracking with disbelief, drawing a curious glance from a jogger. Mrs. Callahan shrugged, her hands buried in her pockets against the cold. "Looked real to me, had your name, your signature, said you were moving to Florida or something." Michael's fists clenched, his nails biting into his palms. "Florida? I didn't sign anything. I'm not moving anywhere." He stormed down the block to Raj's Deli, a corner store where the owner kept spare keys for tenants and knew every neighbor's business. The bell jingled as Michael burst in, his face pale, his breath ragged. "Raj, I need the spare for 3B, he said, leaning on the counter, his hands trembling. Raj, wiping down a display of chips with a rag, hesitated, his dark eyes wary. "Lisa told me you gave her the place, Mike. Said you retiring early, heading to Florida for some sun." Michael's fist slammed the counter, rattling a jar of pickles and a stack of candy bars. "Florida? I'm not rehiring. She's lying." Raj raised his hands, his voice calm but firm. "Okay, man, take it easy. I'll get the key." They walked back to the building, Raj's sneakers squeaking on the pavement. But when they tried the spare, it didn't work either. Lisa had changed every lock, every point of entry sealed against Michael's return. "She's thorough," Raj said, shaking his head. "Came in here last week all smiles, paying for cigarettes and Red Bull with a $100 bill. Who carries cash like that?" Michael's vision blurred with rage, his hands shaking. "She planned this," he said, his voice low, more to himself than Raj. Every step. Michael slumped against the deli's brick wall, the rough texture grounding him as his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it and called Sarah again, his fingers clumsy on the cracked screen. "She's telling everyone I moved out," he said, his voice cracking like dry wood. "She's got papers with my signature." Sarah's tone hardened, her words clipped. "Dad, she's scamming you. We need a lawyer. I'm coming over." Michael nodded, though she couldn't see, his throat tight. "I trusted her," he said softly, almost to himself. Sarah's voice softened, but the edge remained. "I know, Dad. But Lisa's always been out for herself. Remember when she borrowed Mom's sapphire necklace after the funeral and pawned it for a Vegas trip? Said she'd pay it back with her big win? We should have cut her off then." Flashback to their childhood in Oak Park, a modest suburb where their parents' brick bungalow was the heart of their world. Lisa, at 12, was the family's golden child, her dimpled smile winning over their parents while Michael, 2 years older, mowed neighbors' lawns and washed dishes without complaint. At 16, she'd borrowed Michael's savings from his paper route, promising to repay him for a prom dress that turned heads. She never did, laughing it off when he asked, her eyes daring him to push. "You don't need that money, Mikey," she'd said, twirling in her dress. At 22, she'd convinced their mother to co-sign a car loan for a flashy red Mustang, then defaulted, leaving their mom to scramble for payments while Lisa partied in downtown clubs. Michael had always cleaned up her messes, driven by a big brother instinct he now cursed. "She's my little sister," he'd told Ellen years ago when Lisa crashed their Christmas dinner, drunk and demanding cash for rent. Ellen, ever perceptive, had sighed, her hand resting on his. "She's using you, Mike. She's not your responsibility. One day you'll see." He saw it now, standing outside his own home, the weight of decades of excuses crushing his chest. Michael sank onto a bench outside the building, his briefcase at his feet, the cold seeping through his coat and into his bones. This was his home, his refuge. The place where he and Ellen had raised Sarah, where they'd danced to Frank Sinatra in the living room after too much wine at their 10th anniversary, laughing until they collapsed on the couch, where Ellen had painted the walls a soft blue, saying it felt like the sky and made her feel free, even during her chemo treatments. Now it was violated, tainted by Lisa's presence, those neon pink curtains a garish symbol of her intrusion. He pictured her inside, sprawled on his leather couch, maybe selling his furniture on Craigslist or eBay, his life dismantled, piece by piece. "What did you do, Lisa?" he whispered, his words lost in the city's hum, the distant wail of a siren blending with his thoughts. Flashback to a month ago. Lisa had cooked dinner, a rare gesture that caught Michael off guard. He'd come home late, exhausted from a client meeting, and found the apartment filled with the scent of garlic, rosemary, and seared chicken. Lisa, humming an old pop tune, stood at the stove, her hair loose, her apron dusted with flour. "Thought I'd treat you, Mikey," she'd said, plating roasted potatoes and chicken with a flourish. Over dinner, she'd asked about his finances, his savings, his retirement plan, his mortgage history, claiming she wanted to learn from him, to get her life together. Michael, flattered by her interest, had shared more than he should, not noticing her jotting notes on her phone under the table. "You're so smart, Mikey," she'd said, her smile warm, her eyes lingering on him. He'd believed her, craving the sibling bond they'd never had, the family connection he'd lost when Ellen passed. Now, replaying that night, he saw her questions for what they were: reconnaissance, a predator circling her prey. Michael walked to Brood Awakening, a cozy coffee shop 2 blocks away, its warm lights a beacon in the deepening dusk. The bell jingled as he pushed open the door, the smell of roasted beans and cinnamon enveloping him like a fleeting comfort. Jenny, the barista with a nose ring and a knack for remembering orders, called out from behind the counter, "Mike, latte coffee, no sugar?" Michael forced a smile, his face tight with strain. "Yeah, thanks, Jenny." He settled into a corner booth, the worn leather creaking under him, and opened his laptop, its screen casting a harsh glow. Logging into his landlord's portal, he braced himself. The screen glared back. Account terminated. His pulse raced, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, a cold sweat prickling his neck. He hadn't terminated anything. His hands shook as he typed an email to his landlord, Mr. Hensley, a gruff man who rarely answered calls and preferred paper trails. "This is Michael Thompson, tenant of 3B. My lease was not terminated by me. Please clarify immediately. Urgent." He hit send, his head throbbing, and leaned back, rubbing his temples, the chatter of the coffee shop fading into a dull hum. Sarah arrived 20 minutes later, her coat dusted with early snow, her face a mix of worry and steely determination. She slid into the booth, her hands wrapped around a steaming latte, the foam clinging to the rim. "Dad, we're going to the landlord's office first thing tomorrow," she said, her voice firm but gentle, like Ellen's had been in a crisis. "And I called Uncle Dave. He says Lisa's been bragging about taking over your place on Facebook, posting pictures like she owns it." Michael's eyes widened, his coffee untouched, growing cold. "She's what?" Sarah pulled out her phone, her fingers swift as she opened the app. She showed him Lisa's post, a selfie in front of his living room window, those hideous pink curtains framing her smug smile, captioned, "New chapter, new home, #fresh start." Michael's blood boiled, his hands clenching around his mug, the ceramic warm against his cold fingers. "She's taunting me," he said, his voice a low growl, barely containing the fury. Sarah squeezed his hand, her touch grounding him. "We'll fix this, Dad. She's not getting away with it. I promise." Michael's colleague, Tom, a lanky man with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and a dry sense of humor, spotted him from the counter and wandered over, an espresso in hand. "Mike, you look like you got hit by a bus. What's up?" he asked, sliding into the booth uninvited, his long legs sprawling. Michael hesitated. The words stuck in his throat, but the weight of the day pushed them out. He spilled the story. Lisa, the changed locks, the forged papers, the neon pink curtains. Tom whistled, leaning back, his espresso cup dwarfed in his hands. "Your sister? That's ice cold, man. My cousin had a sibling forge his name on a car title once. Had to sue to get it back. Took years, messy as hell." Michael's stomach churned at the word sue. The idea of dragging his sister to court feeling like a betrayal, even after everything. "Sue my sister?" he said, the words foreign, heavy. Tom shrugged, sipping his coffee, the steam curling around his face. "Sometimes family's the worst, Mike. You got a lawyer?" Michael shook his head, his mind spinning, a fog of exhaustion and anger. "Not yet." Tom clapped his shoulder, his grip firm. "Get one, fast. And don't let her sweet-talk you out of this. She's playing dirty." At the coffee shop, another neighbor, Clara, a retired schoolteacher from 2C, approached, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun. "Michael, I heard the commotion earlier," she said, her voice soft but laced with concern. "Is everything all right?" Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair, and gave her a condensed version of the story. Clara's eyes widened, her hand resting on the back of the booth. "Lisa told me you were moving to Florida to be closer to your cousins. She even showed me a signed letter, said it was from you, giving her the apartment." Michael's jaw tightened, his teeth grinding. "A letter? I didn't write any letter." Clara shook her head, her expression pained. "She's convincing, I'll give her that. Had me fooled." "I'm so sorry, Michael." Her words, meant to comfort, only deepened the sting of Lisa's betrayal, the scope of her deception growing clearer.
That night, Michael checked into a Motel 6 on the edge of Lincoln Park, the neon sign flickering outside his window, casting erratic shadows across the room. The air smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener, the mattress sagging under his weight, creaking with every shift. He lay awake staring at the ceiling's water stains, their amorphous shapes like a map of his mistakes. He replayed Lisa's betrayal, her teary arrival 3 months ago, her promises to start fresh, her crocodile tears as she hugged him. The way she'd lingered in his office nook asking about his lease, his finances, his retirement plan, all under the guise of getting her life together. He thought she was trying to rebuild their fractured family, to bridge the gap left by their parents' deaths and Ellen's passing. Now he saw it for what it was. A con, meticulously planned, every smile a calculated move. He thought of their parents long gone and wondered what they'd say. Their mother had always defended Lisa, calling her spirited, her mistakes, just growing pains. Their father had been sterner, warning Michael to watch her, she's too clever for her own good. Michael hadn't listened, blinded by loyalty, by the idea of family. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, snapping him back to the present. A text from Lisa. "Sorry, Mikey. Needed a fresh start. You'll land on your feet." He stared at the words, his jaw tightening, the audacity of her casual cruelty hitting him like a punch. He didn't reply, but the message fueled his resolve, a fire igniting in his chest. This wasn't just about an apartment, it was his life, his memories, his dignity. He thought of Ellen, who'd fought cancer with quiet strength, her hand in his until the end, urging him to be strong. "I'm not done," he muttered to the empty room, his voice firm, cutting through the hum of the motel's ancient heater. He'd fight for his home, for justice, for himself.
The morning sun barely broke through the smoggy haze over Chicago's Loop, casting a feeble glow on the towering glass facades as Michael Thompson and his daughter Sarah stepped out of the landlord's office. The meeting with Mr. Hensley had been a brick wall. His dismissive shrug and curt, "Get a lawyer," echoed in Michael's mind, fueling the anger that simmered beneath his exhaustion. At 52, Michael had faced his share of battles: Ellen's grueling fight with cancer, the relentless pressure of tax season, but his sister Lisa's betrayal was a wound that cut deeper, raw, and unrelenting. Sarah, 28, walked beside him, her boots clicking sharply on the pavement, her phone open to a meticulously curated list of local attorneys. "We're not letting her win, Dad," she said, her voice steady but laced with a fierce determination that reminded Michael of Ellen. "She thinks she can steal your home and just walk away? Not happening." Michael adjusted his scarf against the biting November wind, his throat tight with emotion. "I just want my life back, Sarah," he said, his words nearly drowned out by the city's hum, honking cabs, distant sirens, the low rumble of a passing L train. They headed to the South Loop, to the law office of Karen Delgado, a family law attorney recommended by a friend of Sarah's from college. The building was a sleek monolith of glass and steel, its polished lobby a world apart from Michael's modest Lincoln Park apartment, with its creaky floors and soft blue walls. Karen, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor, sat behind a mahogany desk cluttered with files, her pen poised over a legal pad as Michael poured out the nightmare. Lisa's sudden move-in after her messy divorce, the changed locks, the forged lease transfer, the neon pink curtains that defiled the home he'd built with Ellen. Karen listened intently, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "This is textbook fraud, Mr. Thompson," she said, her tone matter-of-fact but tinged with empathy. "But proving it will be an uphill climb. We need hard evidence, bank records, communications, anything showing her intent to deceive, and we need to move fast before she escalates." Michael's stomach lurched, a sickening twist. "Escalates? What do you mean?" Karen leaned forward, her pen tapping the desk rhythmically. "She's in your apartment, with full access to your possessions, your identity. People like her don't stop at locks. She could be selling your belongings, subletting illegally, or even opening credit lines in your name." Sarah's eyes widened, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. "Credit lines? You think she'd go that far?" Karen nodded, her expression grim. "I've seen it. Siblings, parents, even children pulling stunts like this. Family can be the worst. We'll file an emergency injunction today to freeze any changes to the lease and start building a case for fraud." Flashback to 5 weeks ago. Lisa had been unusually attentive, almost cloyingly so, bringing Michael coffee each morning, her smile too warm as she set the mug on his desk. "Just thought you deserved a treat, Mikey," she'd said, her voice dripping with charm. One evening, she'd sat across from him at the kitchen table, the apartment warm with the glow of Ellen's lavender candles, their scent a faint reminder of better days. Lisa's laptop was open, her fingers typing furiously as she muttered about sorting out my finances. "Trying to be responsible, like you," she'd said, waving off Michael's glance with a laugh. He hadn't noticed the browser tabs open to his bank's login page, nor the sticky note with his passwords hastily scrawled and left in his desk drawer that she'd found days earlier. "You're doing great, Lisa," Michael had said, his voice warm, proud of her apparent effort. Later that night, he'd heard her on the phone in the guest room, her voice low and urgent. "It's all set. I've got everything I need. Just give me a little more time." He'd assumed she was talking about her boutique idea, her dream of making it big in Lincoln Park. Now, he saw it for what it was, the groundwork for his ruin. Back in Karen's office, Michael and Sarah sat across from her, sifting through what evidence they could muster. Sarah pulled up Lisa's Facebook posts on her phone, each one a fresh stab to Michael's heart. The latest showed his living room, now a garish parody of itself, his leather couch draped with a leopard print throw, a cheap gold lamp casting harsh light on a bar cart cluttered with liquor bottles and tacky glassware. The caption read, "Making it my own, #new vibes." Michael's hands shook as he scrolled, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's my couch. Ellen picked it out at an estate sale in Wilmette. We argued over it. She loved it. I thought it was too pricey. She won, like always." Sarah squeezed his arm, her touch a lifeline. "We'll get it back, Dad, all of it." Karen jotted notes, her pen scratching swiftly. "These posts are invaluable. Public evidence of her occupying the space unlawfully strengthens our case. Do you have a copy of your lease agreement?" Michael nodded, pulling up a digital version on his phone, the one he'd saved before Lisa's arrival. "It's in my name," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "Always has been." Karen scanned it, her eyes narrowing with focus. "Excellent. We'll file the injunction this afternoon and request a forensic analysis of the forged signature. Do you have any communications with Lisa? Texts, emails, voicemails?" Michael opened his phone, showing a string of texts from Lisa, all vague promises and deflections. "I'll pay you back for everything, Mikey. Just need a little time." "Don't worry, I'm handling things." Karen nodded, her expression resolute. "This is good. Keep every message. Don't delete anything. We'll also subpoena her bank records to see if she's profiting from your property." As they left the office, the wind whipping through the South Loop's concrete canyons, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her cousin Jake, Uncle Dave's son. "Dad says Lisa's been calling, asking for money," it read. "Says you're fine and starting over in Florida. She's got Aunt Marie buying it too." Michael's face flushed with anger, his scarf suddenly suffocating. "Florida? She's spinning a whole damn fairy tale," he said, his voice tight with fury. Sarah typed a reply, her fingers flying across the screen. "Jake's coming over tonight. He might know more about what she's up to." Michael nodded, but his mind was elsewhere, picturing his apartment, his sanctuary, transformed into Lisa's tacky playground, his memories erased with every gaudy addition. That evening, they met Jake at Lou's Diner in Wicker Park, a retro haven with red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and a jukebox crooning Springsteen's Born to Run. The smell of greasy burgers and strong coffee filled the air, a comforting contrast to the sterile law office. Jake, a burly 30-year-old mechanic with a buzz cut and grease-stained hands, slid into the booth, his expression grim as he stirred sugar into his coffee, the spoon clinking against the mug. "Lisa's been working the whole family," he said, his voice low, his eyes scanning the diner as if Lisa might appear. "Told Dad you gave her the apartment because you're downsizing for a condo in Naples. Even had Aunt Marie convinced you're retiring early, living it up on some beach." Michael's jaw dropped, his coffee untouched, growing cold. Naples? I've never even been to Florida. Jake shook his head, his spoon pausing mid-stir. She's good, Mike. Scary good. But then she asked Dad for a loan to fix up the place. Said she's turning it into some creative hub. That's when he got suspicious. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes narrowed, her latte steaming in her hands. What else did she say? Anything we can use? Jake hesitated, then pulled out his phone, showing a photo Lisa had texted him. Michael's dining room table, now draped with a sequined tablecloth that sparkled under harsh fluorescent lights, surrounded by mismatched chairs that looked scavenged from a thrift store. She's throwing parties, Jake said, his voice heavy. Called it her creative space. Said she's rebranding the apartment for her new life. Michael's heart sank, a wave of violation crashing over him. That dining table was sacred. The one where he and Ellen had hosted Thanksgiving dinners, where Sarah had sprawled out with crayons and math homework, where they'd laughed over burnt turkey and argued over who made better stuffing. Now it was a prop in Lisa's delusion, defiled by her sequins and lies. Creative space? He said, his voice trembling with rage, his hands clenching the edge of the table. She's destroying my home. Sarah's hand found his, her grip firm, her voice steady. We're stopping her, Dad. Jake, can you get more proof? Texts, voicemails, anything? Jake nodded, his jaw set, his fingers drumming on the table. She's been texting me nonstop, asking for cash, talking about her new place. I'll save every damn word. Michael stared at his coffee, the steam curling like a ghost of his old life, his mind replaying decades of Lisa's manipulations. I should have seen this coming, he said, his voice hollow. Jake snorted, leaning back in the booth. Don't beat yourself up, Mike. Lisa's always been a snake. Remember when she borrowed my truck for a weekend trip and crashed it into a ditch? Never paid a dime, just laughed it off like it was nothing. Flashback to 6 weeks ago, Lisa had invited a friend over, a loud woman named Tanya with a cloud of patchouli perfume and jangling bracelets that clinked with every gesture. They'd laughed late into the night, their voices echoing through the apartment as Michael tried to sleep, his pillow muffling their chatter. He'd overheard Lisa boasting, "This place is perfect for my new start. I just need to make it official, you know? Get my name on the papers." Tanya had giggled, her voice slurred with cheap wine. "Girl, you're gonna own this city. This apartment's a gold mine. Location, space, everything." Michael had thought they were joking, caught up in drunken dreams of grandeur, their words floating like smoke. Now he realized Lisa's words were a blueprint, her laughter a mask for a scheme that had been unfolding under his nose. The next morning, Michael woke to a frantic voicemail from Mrs. Callahan, his neighbor from 1A, her voice trembling with worry. "Michael, it's me," she said, the sound of her TV faint in the background. "Lisa's got people over again. Loud music, shouting, sounds like a full-on party. I saw a guy carrying out boxes, Michael. Looked like your stuff, books, maybe those records you and Ellen loved. I'm so worried." Michael's blood ran cold, his fingers tightening around his phone, as he played the message for Sarah in the motel's cramped breakfast nook, the smell of burnt toast and weak coffee lingering in the air. "She's selling my things," he said, his voice low with fury, his hands shaking. Sarah's eyes flashed, her coffee cup slamming onto the table. "We need to get into that apartment, Dad, now." Michael nodded, his resolve hardening like steel. "I'm done waiting for the courts. I need to see what she's done to my home." They met Karen at a police station in Lincoln Park, a squat brick building with flickering fluorescent lights, and a faint smell of stale coffee and disinfectant. Michael explained the situation to Sergeant Malone, a gruff officer with a thick Chicago accent and a weathered face, sliding his lease agreement across the desk. "She's illegally occupying my apartment," Michael said, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath, his fingers tapping the desk. "She forged my signature, changed the locks, and now she's stealing my property." Malone nodded, scribbling notes on a clipboard, his pen scratching loudly in the quiet room. "We can do a welfare check, make sure she's not damaging the place. But without a court order, we can't evict her yet." Sarah leaned forward, her voice sharp, her hands clenched into fists. "She's stealing his life, officer. Can't you do more than a check?" Malone sighed, rubbing his neck, his badge glinting under the harsh lights. "We'll document everything. If she's selling your stuff, that's theft. Get us evidence, photos, receipts, witnesses, and we can escalate to a criminal complaint. You got any neighbors who'll back you up?" Michael nodded, thinking of Mrs. Callahan. "My neighbor's seen it all. She'll talk." Flashback to 4 weeks ago. Michael had come home to find Lisa rearranging his living room, pushing his furniture against the walls to make space for a yoga mat and a cheap incense burner that filled the apartment with a cloying sandalwood scent. "Just sprucing things up," she'd said, her smile disarming as she adjusted a tacky gold-framed mirror on the wall, its reflection distorting the room. "You don't mind, right?" Michael had shrugged, too exhausted from a client meeting to argue, his briefcase heavy in his hand. "Just don't break anything," he'd said, his eyes lingering on his vintage record player, a gift from Ellen that held her favorite jazz records, Coltrane, Fitzgerald, Davis. Now, he wondered if it was still there, or if it had been sold to some stranger on Facebook Marketplace. Another piece of his life erased. That afternoon, Michael, Sarah, and Officer Ruiz, a young, no-nonsense cop with a tight ponytail and a calm authority, arrived at the apartment building for the welfare check. Mrs. Callahan met them at the entrance, her face pale, her hands wringing a dish towel, as if it could absorb her anxiety. "She's got music blaring again," she said, her voice low, her eyes darting to the third floor. "And I saw a guy carrying out a box with your old records, Michael. Those ones Ellen loved. Jazz, right?" Michael's heart sank, a sharp pain slicing through him. Those records were Ellen's soul, played on quiet nights when they danced in the living room, her laughter filling the space. Officer Ruiz buzzed 3B, her finger firm on the button, the sound sharp in the quiet lobby. No answer. She knocked, then pounded, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Chicago PD, open the door." After a long pause, the door cracked open, revealing Lisa, her hair disheveled, her smile forced and brittle, her eyes darting between Michael and the officer. "Oh, hi, Mikey," she said, her voice syrupy, her hands smoothing her wrinkled shirt. "What's all this about?" Michael's fists clenched, his nails biting into his palms, but Officer Ruiz stepped forward, her badge glinting in the dim hallway. "We're here to check the premises, ma'am. Step aside." Inside, Michael's worst fears materialized, a gut punch that stole his breath. The apartment was unrecognizable. His furniture shoved into corners, the walls painted a garish purple that clashed with the neon pink curtains. Ellen's records gone, the vintage record player missing from its stand. A stranger, a scruffy man in a leather jacket with a cigarette tucked behind his ear, lounged on the couch, his boots propped on Michael's coffee table, a beer in hand. A second stranger, a woman with bleached hair and a loud laugh, leaned against the bar cart, sipping from a glass. "Who are these people?" Michael demanded, his voice shaking with barely contained rage, his eyes scanning the room for pieces of his life. Lisa laughed, waving a hand dismissively, her bracelets jangling. "Just friends, Mikey. Relax, it's all good." Officer Ruiz took notes, her expression unreadable, her pen moving swiftly across her clipboard. "This is my home," Michael said, his voice breaking, his hands trembling as he pointed to the purple walls. "She's stolen it." Lisa's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, leaning against the wall with feigned nonchalance. "He gave it to me," she said, her voice smooth as silk, her eyes locked on Ruiz. "Signed it over, right, Mikey?" Sarah grabbed Michael's arm, her grip tight, her voice a hiss. "Don't, Dad. Let the lawyer handle it." Officer Ruiz glanced between them, her voice calm but firm. "We'll file a report. Mr. Thompson, document everything you see missing. Furniture, records, anything of value. We'll need a detailed list." As they left, Michael's legs felt heavy, each step a reminder of what he'd lost. The officer promised a detailed report, but it felt like a hollow victory, a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. Back at the Motel 6, Michael sat on the sagging bed, the room's stale air pressing against him, the hum of the ancient heater a dull backdrop. He pulled out his phone, opening a photo of Ellen, her smile warm even in the grainy image, her eyes sparkling with the life she'd fought to hold on to. "I'm trying, Elle," he whispered, his voice cracking, a tear slipping down his cheek. "I'm trying so hard." Sarah sat beside him, her hand on his shoulder, her voice soft but resolute. "We're not done, Dad. We're getting it back, all of it." Outside, the city hummed, the distant wail of sirens blending with the motel's creaking walls, but Michael felt adrift, wondering how much more Lisa could take before his life was gone for good. The Chicago sky hung low and heavy with slate-gray clouds, their weight mirroring the burden in Michael Thompson's chest as he sat in the Cook County courtroom, his hands clasped tightly on the polished oak table, its grain cool and smooth beneath his trembling fingers. At 52, Michael had never envisioned himself here, in a sterile room with high ceilings, flickering fluorescent lights, and creaking wooden benches, suing his own sister, Lisa, to reclaim the Lincoln Park apartment that held 15 years of his life, the laughter of his late wife Ellen, the Crayon Street childhood of their daughter Sarah, the quiet evenings filled with jazz. The courtroom buzzed with subdued tension, the air thick with the scent of old wood, stale coffee, and anticipation. Sarah, 28, sat beside him, her face etched with fierce determination, her hand occasionally brushing his arm, in a gesture that echoed Ellen's quiet strength. Across the aisle, Lisa lounged in her chair, her auburn hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, her smile smug and defiant, as if this legal battle were a game she'd already mastered. Michael's lawyer, Karen Delgado, adjusted her glasses, her voice a low, steady murmur as she leaned toward him. "We've got a strong case, Michael," she said, her tone urgent but reassuring. The forensic analysis confirmed the signature was forged, and her bank records showed deposits tied to your property. Just stay calm and let me handle this. Michael nodded, his throat tight, his stomach churning with a mix of dread and resolve. Calm was an impossible ask when his home, the sanctuary of his memories with Ellen, hung by the thread of a judge's ruling. Judge Margaret Harlan, a stern woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, called the room to order, her gavel's sharp crack slicing through the murmurs of the gallery. Karen stood, her navy blazer crisp, her voice clear and commanding as she presented their case with surgical precision. The forged lease transfer that handed Lisa control of Michael's apartment, her illegal occupation, the brazen theft of his cherished belongings, including Ellen's beloved jazz records that had once filled their home with Coltrane's soulful notes. Karen projected Lisa's Facebook posts onto a courtroom screen, each image a fresh wound to Michael's heart. His living room transformed into a garish mockery of itself, his leather couch buried under a leopard print throw, his dining table defiled by a sequined tablecloth that glittered under harsh light, a cheap gold lamp illuminating a cluttered bar cart stuffed with liquor bottles. The captions taunted him. My new empire, #living large, and redecorating my castle, #new vibes. The images drew gasps from the gallery, where Mrs. Callahan, Michael's elderly neighbor from 1A, and Jake, his cousin, sat with grim expressions, their eyes fixed on the screen. Michael's jaw tightened, his nails digging into his palms as he stared at his dining table. The one where he and Ellen had hosted raucous Thanksgiving dinners, where Sarah had sprawled out with homework, where they'd laughed over burnt pies and argued over who made better stuffing. "This is fraud, Your Honor," Karen said, her voice rising with conviction, her words echoing in the quiet room. Miss Lisa Thompson exploited her brother's trust, forging documents, stealing his property, and profiting from his home while he was left homeless, forced to live in a motel. Lisa's lawyer, Mr. Carver, a slick man in a tailored charcoal suit with a smooth southern drawl, countered with a practiced ease, claiming Michael had gifted the apartment to Lisa out of familial generosity and had voluntarily relocated to Florida for retirement. Michael's fists clenched under the table, his knuckles white, his breath shallow. Generosity? He'd been betrayed, his life upended by the sister he'd tried to save from her own chaos. Flashback to 4 weeks ago. Michael had sat in his cramped Motel 6 room, the air heavy with the stench of stale cigarettes, burnt toast from the breakfast nook, and the faint chemical tang of cheap air freshener. Takeout containers littered the desk, mingling with stacks of legal documents as he and Sarah reviewed evidence with Karen over a grainy video call. Sarah had stumbled across a Craigslist ad listing Michael's vintage record player for sale, posted from an account linked to Lisa's email. The photo showed the record player, Ellen's gift, a relic of their late-night dances to Coltrane and Fitzgerald, sitting on a stranger's scuffed floor, priced at a measly $200. "She's selling everything," Sarah had said, her voice trembling with fury, her hands shaking as she shoved her phone toward Michael. Karen's voice crackled through the laptop, her pen flying across her notepad. "This is theft, plain and simple. We'll add it to the charges and subpoena her online accounts to trace any sales." Michael had stared at the ad, the image of his record player mocking him, a piece of his life reduced to a bargain listing on a faceless website. "She's erasing us," he'd whispered, his voice breaking, his eyes burning with unshed tears. Sarah had hugged him, her arms tight around his shoulders, her voice fierce. "She won't win, Dad. We'll get it all back, I promise." Karen's voice cut through the static. "We're building a rock-solid case, Michael. Stay focused. We're close." Now, in the courtroom, Karen called Mrs. Callahan to the stand, her frail figure steadying as she gripped the railing, her housecoat swapped for a neat cardigan that gave her an air of quiet dignity. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger as she recounted Lisa's reign over the apartment. Late-night parties that shook the building's walls, strangers carrying out boxes of Michael's belongings under the cover of darkness, Lisa's brazen lies about Michael moving to Florida for a new life. "I saw her friend, a scruffy man with a leather jacket, take Michael's records," Mrs. Callahan said, her eyes meeting Michael's, her voice thick with empathy. "Those were Ellen's. Jazz records, Coltrane, Fitzgerald, all her favorites. He'd never give them away, not in a million years." I knew something was wrong. Judge Harlan nodded, her expression unreadable but attentive, her pen scratching across her notes. Jake testified next, his burly frame filling the stand, his mechanic's hands clasped tightly as he spoke, his voice heavy with frustration. He recounted Lisa's calls to their extended family, her manipulative pleas for loans to fix up her new place, and her texts boasting about taking over Michael's apartment. He showed the courtroom a photo Lisa had sent him of Michael's dining table, its sequined tablecloth glaring under fluorescent lights, surrounded by mismatched chairs that screamed thrift store desperation. "She's been lying to everyone," Jake said, his eyes flicking to Lisa, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers twisting the edge of her scarf. "Told our whole family Mike gave her the place willingly. Even had Aunt Marie sending her money for renovations, thinking she was helping Lisa start over. Lisa's smile faltered, her composure cracking under the weight of Jake's words.
Flashback to 6 weeks ago.
Lisa had thrown a raucous party in Michael's apartment. The music, some pulsing EDM track that clashed with the building's quiet charm, so loud it rattled the windows while Michael was still living there, trying to sleep before an early client meeting. He'd confronted her, exhausted from a long day, his patience frayed like an old rope, his bathrobe tied loosely as he stood in the doorway. "Lisa, keep it down," he'd said, his voice firm but weary, his eyes scanning the chaos, wine glasses scattered, shoes scuffing his hardwood floors, strangers sprawled across his furniture. She'd laughed, a glass of cheap Merlot in hand, her eyes glinting with defiance, her voice slurred. "Lighten up, Mikey," she'd said, swaying slightly. "It's just a little fun. You should join us. Loosen up for once." He'd noticed a stranger, a wiry man with a goatee and a leather vest, admiring his vintage record player, Lisa's voice loud as she said, "Take it if you want. I'm redecorating anyway." Michael had thought she was joking, her words blurred by the music and wine, a careless quip in the heat of the moment. Now, he knew better. Every word had been a deliberate step in her plan to dismantle his life, piece by piece. Back in the courtroom, Karen called a forensic document analyst, Dr. Emily Voss, who took the stand with a stack of charts and digital overlays, her voice calm and precise as she explained her findings. "The signature on the lease transfer document is a forgery," she said, pointing to a projected overlay that highlighted discrepancies in the ink and pressure. "The loops and angles don't match Mr. Thompson's natural handwriting. The signature was traced from an older document, likely one Ms. Thompson had access to." Lisa's lawyer Carver objected, his voice rising with indignation, but Judge Harlan overruled with a sharp, "Sustained," her eyes narrowing at him, her patience visibly thinning. Michael's heart pounded, a small victory that felt like a gasp of air after weeks of suffocation. Karen then presented the police report from Officer Ruiz's welfare check, detailing the apartment's shocking transformation. Garish purple walls that clashed with the neon pink curtains, missing furniture, strangers living there like squatters in a stolen home. Miss Thompson treated her brother's apartment as her personal playground, Karen said, her voice ringing with conviction, her words echoing in the silent courtroom. She stole his property, his memories, his dignity, all while spinning a web of lies to his family, his neighbors, and this court. Lisa took the stand, her demeanor shifting to a practiced vulnerability that made Michael's skin crawl, her performance as polished as ever. She wore a soft gray sweater, her eyes glistening with crocodile tears, her hands clasped, as if in prayer. "Mikey wanted me to have the place," she said, her voice trembling, her gaze fixed on the judge. "He said he was starting over, moving to Florida for a new life. I was just trying to make a home, to honor his wishes after everything I've been through." Michael's blood boiled, his hands gripping the table so tightly the wood creaked, his knuckles white. Sarah whispered, her voice a hiss. "She's lying through her teeth." Karen cross-examined, her questions razor-sharp, each one a blade aimed at Lisa's carefully crafted facade. "Why did you change the locks, Miss Thompson, if the apartment was gifted to you?" Lisa hesitated, her eyes darting to Carver. "For safety, you know? The neighborhood? Why sell Mr. Thompson's belongings, including his late wife's cherished jazz records?" "I thought he didn't want them. He was moving, right?" "Why forge his signature on the lease transfer document?" Lisa's smile cracked, her voice faltering, her hands twisting in her lap. He signed it, I swear." Karen held up the forensic report, her voice cold and unyielding. "The evidence says otherwise, Miss Thompson. You traced his signature to steal his home." Lisa's eyes darted to Carver, who looked away, his jaw tight, his pen tapping nervously. Flashback to 5 months ago, when Lisa first arrived at Michael's doorstep. She'd stood there with a single suitcase, her eyes red and puffy from crying, her voice trembling as she threw her arms around him. "I just need a fresh start, Mikey," she'd said, her tears soaking his shirt, her grip desperate. "Greg left me with nothing, debts, lies, everything. You're all I have left." Michael had believed her, his heart open despite years of her lies, stolen savings from his teenage job, broken promises to their parents, family fights she'd sparked and then fled. "Your family," he'd said, helping her carry the suitcase inside, his voice warm with the hope of mending their fractured bond. Now, he saw her tears as a performance, her hug a calculated trap, her words a script she'd honed over decades of manipulation, each sob a step toward his downfall. The trial stretched into the afternoon, the air thick with tension, the courtroom's fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the worn wooden floor. Michael testified, his voice steady but raw, his words heavy with the weight of loss and betrayal. He described his life in the apartment, Ellen's laughter echoing through the rooms as they danced to Sinatra, Sarah's crayons scattered across the dining table during her elementary school years, the quiet nights when they'd played Ellen's jazz records, her favorites filling the space with warmth. "That was my home," he said, his eyes locking onto Lisa's, who looked away, her fingers shredding a tissue into confetti. "She took it, piece by piece, and lied to everyone I know, my neighbors, my family, even my daughter." Lisa avoided his gaze, her shoulders hunched, her bravado crumbling under the weight of his words, the courtroom silent except for the faint hum of the lights. Judge Harlan called a recess, and Michael stepped outside, the cold Chicago air a shock after the courtroom's stifling warmth, the wind whipping through the loop's concrete canyons. Sarah followed, her arm around him, her voice soft but fierce. "You did great, Dad. She's got nowhere to hide now." Michael shook his head, his eyes on the skyline, the Willis Tower piercing the clouds like a distant promise. "I just want it over, Sarah. I want our home back." During the recess, Michael met with Clara, his neighbor from 2C, who'd come to support him, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, her eyes kind behind wire-framed glasses. The retired schoolteacher clasped his hands, her grip surprisingly strong. "I told the police everything I saw," she said, her voice steady. "Lisa's friends moving your things out, those awful parties shaking the walls, her lies about you moving to Florida. I even saved one of your books I found in the hallway. She was throwing them out, like trash." Michael's throat tightened, his voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you, Clara. That means more than you know." Clara squeezed his hands, her smile warm. "You're a good man, Michael. Ellen would be proud of you, fighting like this." Her words stirred memories of Ellen's strength, her urging him to push through tough times with quiet resolve, her hand in his during her final days. Michael also ran into Tom, his colleague from the accounting firm, who'd taken the day off to attend the trial. Tom, lanky with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, clapped Michael's shoulder, his voice gruff but warm. "You're killing it in there, Mike," he said, sipping a coffee from a nearby vendor. "Lisa's story's falling apart. I always knew she was trouble. Remember when she showed up at the office Christmas party, flirting with the boss, asking for investment advice?" Michael managed a weak smile, the memory bitter. Lisa had crashed the party 2 years ago, charming everyone, her laughter too loud, her questions too pointed. "Yeah," Michael said, his voice low. "I should have seen it then." Tom shook his head. "Don't blame yourself. She's a pro. But you've got this." Tom's support, simple but genuine, bolstered Michael's resolve, a reminder that he wasn't alone. The next day, Judge Harlan delivered her ruling, her voice firm and measured, cutting through the courtroom's heavy silence. "The evidence is overwhelming," she said, her eyes scanning the room, pausing briefly on Lisa. The lease transfer was forged. Ms. Lisa Thompson illegally occupied Mr. Michael Thompson's apartment, engaged in theft, and committed fraud, causing significant emotional and financial harm. The gavel fell, a resounding crack that echoed in Michael's chest, ordering Lisa's immediate eviction, the return of Michael's possessions where recoverable, and damages for fraud and emotional distress, including legal fees. Lisa's face crumpled, her bravado shattered, her eyes darting to the exit as if she might bolt. Carver whispered something to her, but she shook her head, her hands trembling, her ponytail slipping loose. Michael exhaled, a weight lifting from his shoulders, but the victory felt bittersweet. His home was damaged, his trust in family shattered, his memories tainted by Lisa's intrusion. Flashback to the day Lisa moved in, 5 months ago. She'd stood in Michael's doorway, a single suitcase at her feet, her eyes red from crying, her voice trembling as she threw her arms around him. "I just need a fresh start, Mikey," she'd said, her tears soaking his shirt, her grip desperate. "Greg left me with nothing, debts, lies, a broken heart. You're all I have." Michael had believed her. His heart opened despite years of her lies, stolen savings from his teenage paper route, broken promises to their parents, family fights she'd sparked and fled. "Your family," he'd said, helping her carry the suitcase inside, his voice warm with hope. Now, he saw her tears as a performance, her hug a calculated trap, her words a script she'd perfected over decades, each sob a step toward his downfall. The following week, Michael returned to his apartment with Sarah and Jake, the new keys jangling in his hand, a small but triumphant sound. The locks had been changed, legally this time, and the neon pink curtains were gone, replaced by temporary blinds that let in soft, filtered light. The purple walls remained, a jarring reminder of Lisa's violation, but Michael's furniture was mostly intact, thanks to police recovering some items from pawn shops and online marketplaces. The vintage record player was gone, sold to an unknown buyer, but Mrs. Callahan had saved a box of Ellen's jazz records, hidden in her apartment during Lisa's chaotic reign. "I knew you'd want these," she said, her eyes kind as she handed him the box. The cardboard worn but the records pristine. Michael hugged her, his voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Callahan. You've done more than you know." Inside the box, he found Ellen's favorite, John Coltrane's A Love Supreme, its sleeve worn from years of love, a piece of her still with him. Lisa had vanished, leaving behind a trail of debts, angry acquaintances, and a restraining order Michael had filed for good measure. Jake heard through family gossip that she'd moved to Milwaukee chasing another fresh start with some new mark. Michael didn't care where she'd gone. His focus was on rebuilding, painting the walls a soft blue again, the color Ellen had chosen for its sky-like calm, hanging new curtains, reclaiming his space step by step. One evening, he played Coltrane's record, the soft strains of saxophone filling the apartment, wrapping around him like a warm embrace. Sarah sat beside him on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder, her voice soft. "We did it, Dad," she said, her hand squeezing his. Michael nodded, his eyes on the window, the Chicago skyline twinkling beyond, the city's lights a constellation of resilience. "We did," he said, but the scars of Lisa's betrayal lingered, a quiet ache beneath his relief. He thought of Ellen, her strength during her cancer battle, her love that had anchored him through the darkest days. "I kept our home, Elle," he whispered, the music swelling, Coltrane's notes a balm to his wounded heart. The apartment was his again, but the journey had changed him. Hardened him, yes, but also deepened his gratitude for Sarah, for his neighbors, for the life he'd fought to reclaim. He was stronger, wiser, ready to move forward, not to Florida, but here, in the home he'd built, the life he'd earned. The next weekend, Michael hosted a small gathering. Sarah, Jake, Mrs. Callahan, Clara, and Tom to celebrate his return. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and pizza from Lou's Diner, the dining table cleared of sequins and restored to its simple oak glory. Laughter filled the room, a sound Michael hadn't heard in months. And for the first time, the apartment felt like home again. As the evening wound down, he stepped onto the balcony, the cool night air brushing his face, the city humming below. "We're back," he said to the skyline, to Ellen, to himself. The scars would fade, but the strength he'd found would stay. A quiet victory forged in the fire of betrayal.